I go to St. Catherine's. I'm turning 12 but 11, and I have synesthesia.
Hi, it's All in the Mind on RN. I'm Lynn Malcolm with our series of highlight programs from 2018.
Some of my favourite synesthetic experiences is with music. I see the colour shooting past my head to like a point in the distance, which is really cool. It feels like it's, especially in songs that I really like, sort of trying to take me to that point.
What colour is Monday for you? What about the number 4? Can you taste the colour purple? And does the saxophone sound orange or blue? If those questions don't sound too strange to you, you may be a synesthete, like Nina.
Everything I hear, I see in shapes and colours, even flavours and smells I can see. I can't even imagine how it is to not see a sound. Even silence has a colour. It's more white, but it's like a void, but I can see it as a shape. Always little sounds in the silence as well that I see. You know, like mini snowflakes. Every number has a colour and a shape to it, and the year, the week. I can just make the list longer and longer the more I think about it.
More from artist Nina Norden in our next episode, looking at synesthesia and art. Today, how synesthetes perceive the world. Associate Professor Anina Rich is the Director of the Perception and Action Research Centre at Macquarie University, where she heads up synesthesia research.
The word synesthesia actually comes from the Greek syn, meaning together, and aesthesis, meaning of the senses. And so people have often described it as a mixing of the senses. In fact, it's an umbrella term that can encompass a lot of different types of experiences that all fit within a sense of having an extraordinary response to a very ordinary stimulus. So, for example, people who have auditory visual synesthesia have sounds of different types. It could be voices, it could be musical notes, it could be musical genres, evoking very specific and consistent experiences in the visual domain. So it might be moving pictures, it might be particular objects that have a colour and a form and a location that they see every time they hear that particular sound. Perhaps the most common form is where people have vivid experiences of colour in response to letters, numbers and words, whether they see them, hear them or even think about them.
So that's the most common mode?
Yes, although estimating the prevalence of any types of synesthesia is quite tricky because it's not a disorder. And so lots of people have synesthesia and don't realise it. So with any of these are approximates, but certainly Grapheme-Color Synesthesia, where people have letters and numbers evoking colour experiences, very common. Also, types of auditory visual synesthesia seem to be relatively common. There's also some other forms which relate to how we might perceive touch. So if you are seeing somebody being touched, people with mirror touch synesthesia actually experience a sense of touch themselves. And there are some estimates that suggest that that may be actually the most common, but we don't know yet how closely that's related to the colour forms.
And some people also, not only do they see colour in relation to letters and numbers, but they also see shape.
That's right. So quite often we study the colour aspect because that's the bit that's maybe easiest to get a handle on. But in one of our studies, we looked at the types of experiences evoked by just single tones on different instruments. And what we found was that far from just being colour, they were essentially geometric objects. So, for instance, one synesthete, a low note on the piano, was a big round ball that she could see low down in space, whereas a high note on the same instrument, on the piano, was much smaller and kind of sparkly and a brighter colour. And by studying people's experiences and getting them to really illustrate those complexities, we can start to get a sense of what the underlying patterns are. What's interesting about this is it actually seems that synesthesia builds on mechanisms we all have. So, for example, if I play you a tone, a low tone on the piano and then a high tone on the piano, and I show you two shapes, the shapes perhaps generated by my synesthete, most non-synesthetes will also say that the small, light-coloured, sparkly object goes with the high pitch and the big dark ball would be more likely to go with the low note. So it seems to build on systematic implicit patterns that we all have about low tones going with big, dark things and high tones going with small. right things.
So is there a sense that it is something that's in us all, but with synesthetes it's pronounced?
It could be. So one of the hypotheses that we've been working on is the sense in which synesthesia might be an extension of a continuum. And so people like me who don't have synesthesia might be kind of in the middle of the continuum, and synesthetes who really experience these additional sensations might be at one end. And at the other end, there's a phenomenon called aphantasia, where people don't have any mental imagery at all. And one of the working hypotheses that we're looking at the moment is that perhaps what we're seeing is a spectrum of experience. And it's possible that synesthesia is at one end and maybe aphantasia might be theoretically the other end of that same spectrum.
Anina Rich. Eliza found out that there was a name for her way of perceiving the world when she was about 7. She was surprised that not everyone saw things as she did. I'm speaking here with Eliza and later her mum, Rachel Watt.
I also have colours for people, so everyone, even if I haven't met them, has an aura around them, and it's the colour of them. The first thing I base it on is what they look like, and that gives me a colour, and then if I get to know them, what their voice sounds like. Usually doesn't change it much, but could change it just a bit.
Do you have an aura around me?
Yeah, you're yellow and orange. We actually talked about this before the interview. Mum showed me a picture and you're yellow, but then I heard your voice and now you're yellow and orange.
Really?
Everyone has an aura, even animals, and pictures and reflections of people. It's really cool because it sort of gives me a first impression. I at first judge a person on their colour, not really what they look like or what they are like.
So are there particular colours that you like better and so you judge the person according to your favourite colour?
Not usually, but if I really like the colour, then I might feel like they're going to be a nice person, or if I don't like the colour, not going to be a very nice person. But they only happen with my very favourite and worst colours.
Which are?
Well, I like peach and rose gold, but I really don't like the greenish, darkish brown, which sort of makes me want to shiver. And for those people, I just sort of feel like I sort of want to cringe, which doesn't help if I'm meeting someone with that colour and I'm cringing for no reason and they're thinking, what's she doing?
What colour do you have yourself?
Actually, I didn't think I had an aura until one day I was thinking about it and looked in the mirror and I was like, can I see oh, there is an aura, which was quite a surprise because I didn't know. It's a peachy colour, sort of light peach, and sometimes a tiny bit of rose gold.
What about your mum?
She is a reddy pinkish, which is like 6, which is her number, or maybe a bit of 9. 6 is quite a mothering figure that looks after 2. And my dad is quite blue and a bit green sometimes. And he is a bit of 4 sort of character. Yeah.
Did you know that, Rachel?
I didn't know I was a 6. I didn't know that Dad was a 4. It's interesting sometimes when Eliza's trying to explain to me about the numbers and the personalities and the colours, these things all overlap with each other. So she's explained to me that although a person's name written down can have a colour and they have an aura of colour around them, when I speak their name and she sees the colours that come from the sounds of their name, that adds another layer. That can be different colours that add on to it. It's just so many layers of it. It's hard to imagine if you don't experience it.
Rachel Watt and her daughter Eliza. The most studied variant of synesthesia is Grapheme-Color Synesthesia, where a person perceives colours associated with numbers and letters.
With numbers, I've noticed that usually even numbers have more reddish, pinkish, warmer colours, and odd numbers have colder colours. My lucky number's 2 because it's my favourite colour. It's peachy rose gold. With letters, they don't have personalities. Numbers have personalities.
Personalities?
Yeah.
Really? Give me an example of that.
Well, 7 is not very nice. He's sort of a bully, and 17 is also a bully, but he doesn't do a lot of the bullying. He just advises 7, so they're not a very nice pair. But 6 is like a mothering number, and that's sort of a reddy pinky colour. And 2 is really nice and little, but she wants to speak her mind to the bullies, like 7 and 17, but she doesn't feel like she can. She's not brave enough to.
Eliza Watt.
How often do synesthetes complain about their multitude of perceptions that might interfere or distract into their lives, or perhaps even their learning?
It's actually quite infrequent to find somebody who has a problem with their synesthesia. If anything, most people think of it as sort of, well, I would call it an unusual gift. And most people think it's strange that we're even talking about it because isn't that the way everybody sees the world? There are some people who do find it overwhelming, and that tends to be that when there's multiple synesthesias going on. So there's auditory, there's olfactory synesthesia, there may be tactile experiences and so on. But for most people, it's okay. I think there's a lot more research to be done in how it might affect learning and education, and that's something that I'd be keen to do in the future, because I'm getting more and more emails from teenagers at high school or teachers wanting to know, is there a way that we can better utilise synesthesia to help rather than to hinder? So, for instance, some people report things like, I'm not very good at maths because you can't multiply colours. On the other hand, another synesthete said, I'm great at maths because I can kind of already see what sort of realm of colour space the answer should be in, so I know if I get it wrong. Similarly, for things like memory, although the objective evidence is still mixed at the moment about whether or not synesthetes as a group are likely to be able to use synesthesia to boost their memory, we have individual case reports where people will say, well, I know that the person's name was Debbie or Paula because it was a green name, but I don't know which one of those it is. So they can sort of use it as a cue, and then maybe it gets confusing there, whereas other people will say, well, I know the address can't have been 78 because it was a blue colour, so it must have been 87. So they kind of use their synesthesia to scaffold recall.
There's also the suggestion that it can be a bit disconcerting when there's an incongruence between the synesthete's perception of something and the reality. Just tell me about how you've studied that.
In everyday life, it probably just is a little bit of that doesn't look right. You know, fire extinguishers written in the wrong colour, that sort of thing. But the consistency of synesthetic experience is something that allows us to get an objective index of the experience, and it's based on that idea that incongruency might cause some change in behaviour. So if I present in the lab a synesthete with her letter colours, so if an A elicits red, I've matched the colour for A and I present a nice red A, then that's a congruent stimulus and there's no mismatch between the synesthesia that's evoked by the letter and the actual colour that she's seeing. If I then present that same A, which evokes synesthetic red, but in a blue colour, what we find is that if all she's doing is naming the display colours, she's slower in the incongruent case. So what that suggests is that synesthesia is involuntary in the sense that people can't stop it just because it's annoying or interfering in a particular way. I think in everyday life, very rarely do people say that it actually affects their reaction time to driving or anything like that. But in the lab, I can use that slight difference in reaction time to give us an objective measure of the experience. And from that, we've then looked at other questions about what's the role of attention in synesthesia, when is it evoked, when can we stop it from being evoked, all of those sort of things by using that objective index as a measure of whether synesthesia is occurring.
Associate Professor Anina Rich from Macquarie University. You're with All in the Mind on RN. I'm Lynn Malcolm, and we're discussing synesthesia. It's a condition in which one type of stimulation evokes the sensation of another. For example, you may always perceive the colour blue with Monday or the colour orange with the number 4. You may even taste blackberries when you see the city skyline. It's like a crossing of the senses. Joshua Berger first became interested in synesthesia when he was studying for a medical degree. He met a fellow student with Grapheme-Color Synesthesia. She would perceive specific colours with numbers. He was intrigued about whether she thought synesthesia affected her learning.
She turned to me and said it probably lent to some of the affinities I had for subjects such as English or art because they had extra colour. But mathematics never made sense to me. Why should a blue 3 times an orange 4 equal a green 12? All the other students would be doing black 3 by black 3 is black 9, or black 3 by black 4 is black 12. But for her, this lacked an essential component, and no one ever addressed it. She then told me that this led to a lifelong avoidance of maths, and she has really bad maths anxiety. It was a lack of the world reflecting her expectations or her embodied model of what she might or should be seeing.
Joshua Berger was inspired to take up full-time research into synesthesia at the University of Sydney. He and his friend decided to develop a coloured calculator to see if this would help her maths anxiety.
So we made a very early prototype which was based off the Microsoft 97 calculator, the very standard calculator there, and attached it to a colour wheel. So before she started the calculator program, she would click the digit 1 and then a colour wheel would pop up and then she would select the colour. Now initially we thought that this was just going to be pleasant, that this would be nice for her. Little did we suspect the reaction that was elicited when she finally used it. She wrote me a long, very emotive message saying, "This is the first time that addition and subtraction have made sense to me. It made my work about 80% easier. It was quite life-changing, and being told her whole life that she had some sort of cognitive difficulties when it came to mathematics, for it finally to make sense, it was quite a big impact."
To further investigate how helpful a self-coloured calculator could be, Joshua Berger set up an experiment. He devised a mathematics test for a group of people with grapheme-coloured synesthesia. Each person was allowed to choose their own colours on the calculator, and he measured their speed and accuracy in the test.
So far what we've found is that in a study of 55 people with Grapheme-Color Synesthesia, there was a very, very large positive effective response by all the participants. Not a single participant disliked the calculator, with I think over 60% saying that they would definitely use one of these in the future and asking me, when can I get this? However, we have to take those self-reports with a grain of salt because of effects I may have on the participants, experimenter effects, or biases they may have coming into the experiment. We couldn't blind this experiment. The participants clearly knew that they were getting a colourful calculator which reflected their personal experience. But it was encouraging that no one disliked it. And we have some early evidence to suggest that, yes, there are a subgroup of these people with synesthesia, who are benefited by having their colours on the calculator. And as long as it's a small effect and they enjoy it, it seems worthwhile.
Joshua Berger, who's interested in exploring more applications for synesthetes. Anina Rich heads up research on synesthesia at Macquarie University. They're studying what's different about the brain of someone with synesthesia.
So traditionally people talked about synesthetes as having hardwired connections between areas that the rest of us don't. So that might be an auditory visual synesthesia. The auditory cortex, which is the first place where you process sound, might have a connection to visual cortex, perhaps the area that is involved in colour. There's now evidence that probably most of us, actually, all of us have connections between our sensory cortices in that way. So it's perhaps not so unusual to have that connection. What might be different is that synesthetes might have stronger connections than the rest of us. Now, one of the theories that we've been working on is that actually synesthesia is evoked by the concept of a letter or a number, certainly in Grapheme-Color Synesthesia where we're focused a lot. And in that case, it may actually be more, rather than hardwired connections between those early processing areas for sensory information, it might be the regions of the brain that are involved in holding our concepts of objects. And perhaps it may be like knowing that a banana is typically yellow. So if I show you a grayscale picture of a banana, you have no problem telling me that it's usually yellow. If I present you a purple banana, you're actually slower to recognise it as a banana than if it's yellow. And in one of our recent studies that my PhD student Lena has been running, we've actually been looking in non-synesthetes about that sort of colour activation when you see objects that have typical colours. And the next stage is actually to look in synesthetes and see, is the brain signal actually similar when synesthetes are having these colours in response to letters? Because it may be at that conceptual level. So the regions of the brain that are involved in holding our concepts of objects may be the crucial ones for synesthesia.
If that's correct, what are the implications of that?
For synesthesia, I think it would be important in terms of understanding what it's most like. So there's been some studies that have made the case that synesthesia it's different from colour perception, but it's really low level in the way that colour perception is. But the body of the data seems to be that it's not the same as colour perception. We don't get the same sort of effects as we do when we put two colours next to each other, for example. Other people have suggested that it might be like mental imagery. And so imagining colours, but maybe a very involuntary form of mental imagery. And so a recent study with Rocco Chow, one of my ex-PhD students who's now at Harvard University, and Joel Pearson at UNSW, we looked at the nature of synesthetic colours, and we've actually found that it's different from both of those things. So it doesn't behave the same as colour perception. It doesn't behave the same as colour imagery. It seems to be a unique type of colour experience. Now, it's possible that it's somewhere between that and that knowledge about a banana being yellow, for example. So by fitting synesthesia into the bigger picture of how we represent perceptual features of objects, we can start to understand how the whole system works. Because, of course, the brain doesn't work in isolation. It doesn't have it has a little bit of the brain that's most interested in colour perception, for example, and we know that's important, but it works within a big system. And understanding that system is crucial for understanding how the brain works, understanding how we perceive the world. And with that fundamental understanding, then we can start to help people who have a deficit or an impairment in a particular type. So, for example, semantic dementia patients lose the concept of an object. So they might look at a picture of a zebra and say, oh, it's a stripy horse. They can describe it, but they've lost that concept. So by understanding how we represent concepts of objects, how we bring together features and integrate information, we can potentially have a much greater understanding of clinical conditions like that. And I think synesthesia offers us a unique insight into that system that we don't have through other means.
And Nina Rich. And this is Eliza jamming on the saxophone with her teachers Benny and Lockie.
One of my favourite things about playing the saxophone is seeing the colours, and that's one of the times that I do pay quite a lot of attention to them, and they come from the back of my head and shoot off really fast to a point in the distance, probably 3 metres away from me. Sometimes it'll be a bit late, like I'll play a note that's green and then green will come a few seconds later. Or sometimes it'll be right on the dot and it'll happen straight away.
Do emotions affect the colours that you're seeing and the music you're playing?
Yeah, how I'm feeling definitely affects what sort of pieces I play, which affects what colours there are, but I don't think my emotions have a very big impact on my colours.
What colour does the saxophone connote to you?
Overall, it's a yellow instrument, but the noises are often quite blue, dark blue and green. When I play it, it's more yellowy greenish, sometimes a bit of pink because I like to play in the higher octaves, and that's quite a high colour for me.
Eliza. Often the extremes of human experience lead to difficulty. But synesthesia is not a disorder. Nina Rich says studying it gives a unique opportunity to learn more about human perception.
Synesthesia is important to study because it gives us a unique insight into how perception might work and how we might represent objects. But I think more broadly, it reminds us of the subjectivity of perception. So actually, you and I, as non-synesthetes, kind of assume we see the world the same way. But we can never verify that. We can look at the same thing and use the same words to describe it, and yet we can never know that we see the world in the same way. Your perception of it is interpreted through the filter of your prior experience, your knowledge about the world, and your emotions and your goals and everything at the time. And when we study synesthesia, it's a reminder that all of a sudden we use language to compare something and realise that we don't see the same thing. But that's just an extreme of actually what happens for everybody. One of the things that synesthesia might be able to tell us about is the way that the brain puts together information across the senses. And because we can use this unusual scenario to look at mechanisms that we all share, it pushes science along, I think, to study it from that perspective.
And it also raises a number of philosophical questions, as you've alluded to. How interested is the field of philosophy in synesthesia?
Yeah, it's one of those nice fields where there's interest from a lot of different perspectives. So the philosophers do get a bit excited about the idea of having two qualia simultaneously, which shouldn't be possible. So a qualia or an experience might be that you're seeing something that's coloured, that's reflecting wavelengths of light that make you perceive colour, and that appears like colour in the world. So I'm framing that carefully because actually colour doesn't exist in the world. We just perceive it, right? So there's that perceptual type of colour, and then there's the synesthetic colour. And so philosophers have argued, well, is that an instance of experiencing two qualia simultaneously? It's also of interest to artists, it's of interest to musicians, and I think broadly other types of scientists.
Associate Professor Nina Rich, Director of the Perception and Action Research Centre at Macquarie University. Before we go, Eliza Watts has something else to share about her perceptions.
I just realised that I've never told my mum that colours also have personalities, because it seemed so obvious that I didn't think to tell her or anyone else. Whenever I'm talking about synesthesia, it's quite hard because I'm thinking about all the most obvious things to me. I sort of have to think, okay, this person knows nothing about anything that I'm seeing, and then talk to them like they're an alien.
That's right, actually. None of us know anything about what anyone else is perceiving, really, do we? Yeah.
Rachel Watt and her daughter Eliza. Thanks to producer Diane Dean and sound engineer Isabella Tropiano. And I'll leave you now with my extended conversation with Eliza and her mother, Rachel Watt.
I'm Eliza. I go to St. Catherine's. I'm in Year 6. I'm turning 12 but 11, and I have synesthesia.
I'm Rachel. I'm Eliza's mum. I'm a speech pathologist who works with dyslexia.
When did you realise that there was a name for this experience that you have, synesthesia?
I'm not really sure. I don't remember the exact point, but I think it might have been around Year 2 or 3, because that's when I started paying attention to it as something that wasn't normal. Because before I just thought, well, doesn't everyone see the letter A as blue or the number 2 as pink? I thought it was normal.
And so tell me about your experience. Just describe what your synesthesia is and what it means.
Well, some of my favourite synesthetic experiences is with music, and I see the colour shooting past my head to like a point in the distance, which is really cool. It feels like it's, especially in songs that I really like, sort of trying to take me to that point. And I have painted what I've seen a few times, and It was quite cool. I did one with Nina Nova, which was nice because I could see what her colours were and what mine were and how they were different. I also have colours for people, so everyone, even if I haven't met them, has an aura around them, and it's the colour of them. The first thing I base it on is what they look like, and that gives me a colour, and then if I get to know them, what their voice sounds like. Usually doesn't change it much, but could change it just a bit.
Do you have an aura around me?
Yeah, you're yellow and orange. We actually talked about this before the interview. Mum showed me a picture and you're yellow, but then I heard your voice and now you're yellow and orange.
Really?
Everyone has an aura, even animals, and pictures and reflections of people or animals. It's really cool because it sort of gives me a first impression because they're really important for me. I at first judge a person on their colour, not really what they look like or what they are like.
So are there particular colours that you like better and so you judge the person according to your favourite colour?
Not usually. It's just their colour. It's not really good or bad, but if I really like the colour, then I might have a good impression. I might feel like they're going to be a nice person, or if I don't like the colour, not going to be a very nice person. But they only happen with my very favourite and worst colours.
Which are?
Well, I like peach and rose gold, but I really don't like the greenish, darkish brown, which sort of makes me want to shiver. And for those people, I just sort of feel like I sort of want to cringe, which doesn't help if I'm meeting someone with that colour and I'm cringing for no reason and they're thinking, what's she doing?
What colour do you have yourself?
Actually, I didn't think I had an aura until one day I was thinking about it and looked in the mirror and I was like, can I see oh, there is an aura, which was quite a surprise because I didn't know. It's a peachy colour, sort of light peach, and sometimes a tiny bit of rose gold.
What about your mum?
She is a reddy pinkish, which is like 6, which is her number, or maybe a bit of 9. 6 is quite a mothering figure that looks after 2. And my dad is quite blue and a bit green sometimes. And he is a bit of 4 sort of character. Yeah.
Did you know that, Rachel?
I didn't know I was a 6. I didn't know that Dad was a 4. It's interesting sometimes when Eliza's trying to explain to me about the numbers and the personalities and the colours, these things all overlap with each other. So she's explained to me that although a person's name written down can have a colour and they have an aura of colour around them, when I speak their name and she sees the colours that come from the sounds of their name, that adds another layer. That can be different colours that add on to it. It's just so many layers of it. It's hard to imagine if you don't experience it.
So you see colours associated with letters, with words, with numbers?
Yeah, numbers have colours, so do letters, and with numbers I've noticed that usually even numbers have more reddish, pinkish, warmer colours, and odd numbers have colder colours. My lucky number's 2 because it's my favourite colour. It's peachy rose gold. With letters, they don't have personalities. Numbers have personalities.
Personalities?
Yeah.
Really? Give me an example of that.
Well, 7 is not very nice. He's sort of a bully, and 17 is also a bully, but he doesn't do a lot of the bullying. He just advises 7, so they're not a very nice pair, but 6 is like a mothering number, and that's sort of a reddy pinky colour. And 2 is really nice and little, but she wants to speak her mind to the bullies, like 7 and 17, but she doesn't feel like she can. She's not brave enough to.
Do you use these personalities associated with numbers in any sort of creative way? It sounds like you've got whole stories around these personalities.
Yeah, sometimes when I'm bored, I'll think up a story like 2 wanted to go to the park and 6 went with her. 9 watched from a distance because 9 watches over 6 and 6 watches over 2. And 19 is quite old, but she watches over them silently and has her own opinions but never shares them. She's quite a conservative figure. But then 7 comes and ruins it all and things like that in class when I'm bored or don't have anything to do. Yeah, it's really cool.
So what about maths? How do you do in maths? Is this confusing for you?
Maths isn't one of my best subjects. I really enjoy maths, but for me it depends a lot on the teacher. And in maths, well, I have sort of learnt not to look at the colours because I'm used to them, so I don't really pay attention to them. But they're always there. I know some synesthetes have a thing like, say it was 2 plus 7, they'd be like, I can't do that because those numbers don't go together.
The colours of the numbers don't go together?
Yeah, or the personalities or whatever sort of synesthesia they have. I don't have that. But if I concentrate on that a lot, then I might think, oh, that's not right. But usually I'm not focusing on my synesthesia in maths.
Because I don't know whether you know, but Joshua Berger is developing a calculator where you can assign your own colours to the numbers. You've tried it. What is it like?
Really cool because you see the numbers with colours inside them, and I feel like I understand it more. It's sort of like lifting up a veil from my eyes, and it was really strange because he also did another test where all of the numbers had different colours that weren't my colours. And that was sort of disorientating. I didn't really understand them. Say it was 5 plus 2, but 2 was green, not pink. Because 3 is a green number, I might accidentally add 3 to 5, not 2 to 5, which was really weird because I don't usually get those kind of questions. Like at school, it's usually just black and I can put my own colours around them, or they're there, instead of having to take those colours off and put on new ones, and that's when I notice it most, I think.
Rachel, tell me about when you first noticed that Eliza had synesthesia.
I think she was around 6 or 7, and we were having conversations about unusual aspects of her visual perception. Eliza can do some interesting things with her eyes, when it kind of makes me shiver, but some people can turn one eye outwards while the other eye's straight and that sort of thing. And she can turn one object into 5 or 6 objects by the way that she focuses on it. So we were talking about all of these sorts of things, and I think this is where the colour started to come into it. I just, even just listening to her now, it's fascinating to hear some things that I've never heard before about the way that she sees the world. So I just put it in that box of another interesting thing, the way that she can imagine all angles of an object in her mind and turn it around in her mind. She can picture things from a bird's eye view or from behind or in front or to the side of things that she wouldn't have ever seen in real life. So was all mushed in with all of this interesting information. And I looked it up and I saw synesthesia and then started to wonder, well, surely there's someone else in the family. Where is this coming from? But we haven't yet found anybody else in the family who experiences anything like it. So it's just a case of working with it and seeing if it can be a help to her in anything, and trying to make sure that we're aware enough of what's going on that it's not a hindrance in anything, particularly to do with school learning.
Eliza, have you noticed at school that things can be a bit confusing or a bit difficult because of your synesthetic perceptions?
Usually no. Only when I really focus on or think about my synesthesia. It can, I have tried, but only if I think, hang on, 4's not green, it's red, or something like that. Do I actually see the colours or notice the colours? Because usually it's like you wouldn't point out a leaf on the side of the road because it would just be a normal everyday thing. And you wouldn't really think about it in depth because it's just a leaf on the side of the road.
Your mum sent me a lovely video of you playing the saxophone. Were you seeing colours when you were playing that music?
One of my favourite things about playing the saxophone is seeing the colours, and that's one of the times that I do pay quite a lot of attention to them, and they come from the back of my head and shoot off really fast to a point in the distance, probably 3 meters away from me. But sometimes it'll be a bit late, like the colours won't have certain effect, like I'll play a note that's green and then green will come a few seconds later. Or sometimes it'll be right on the dot and it'll happen straight away. I don't see a pattern there, but there might be one, I'm just not seeing it.
Do emotions affect the colours that you're seeing and the music you're playing?
I think they do. I don't often realise it because whenever it does change, it's very subtle. But a few times I have seen a slight change with a tinge of colour, and yeah, how I'm feeling definitely affects what sort of pieces I play, which affects what colours there are, but I don't think my emotions have a very big impact on my colours.
What colour does the saxophone connote to you?
Overall, it's a yellow instrument, but the noises are often quite blue, dark blue and green. My teacher is very dark blue, and when he plays, it's dark blue and green. And when I play it, it's more yellowy greenish, sometimes a bit of pink because I like to play in the higher octaves, and that's quite a high colour for me.
As you've got further insight into Eliza and her perception of things, has it changed the way you communicate with her or relate to her?
Well, it's just another question that I would ask if I'm helping her with some maths or we're learning about a new word that she's come across in a book or heard, talking about the colours or the personalities. I would ask just to see if there's something that might conflict or might tie in with another word or another number. We tried to work on the 7 times tables using colours. But, of course, with 7s, you quite quickly get into double-digit numbers. And then you get 2 numbers of different colours sort of melding into each other, don't you? Crossing over a bit. And then you have issues with some numbers. I remember 42 and 49 look quite similar. So then you don't know whether you're talking about 6 7s or 7 7s. And so it all got a bit complicated, and it was difficult for her to learn through the colours. It seemed to get in the way. I'm always asking to see if we can use it in some useful way in the learning. But, yeah, as I said, it's more to do with making sure it doesn't get in the way of anything.
Eliza, is there something that you'd like to be or a way to use your synesthesia as you get older?
Well, where doing a project right now at school where we had to talk about one of the jobs that we might have when we're older. I actually chose a synesthete expert like Josh. I think it would be really cool to know other people's colours and try find ways to help other kids or adults in maths, which seems to be one of the points that synesthetes struggle at. That would be really nice to help them.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me?
I just realised that I've never told my mum that colours also have personalities, because it seemed so obvious that I didn't think to tell her or anyone else, which is hard because whenever I'm talking about synesthesia, it's quite hard because I'm thinking about all the most obvious things to me. I sort of have to think, okay, this person knows nothing about anything that I'm seeing, and then talk to them like they're an alien.
That's right, actually. None of us know anything about what anyone else is perceiving, really, do we? Yeah. Rachel, would you like to add anything?
I'm really interested in the crossover. When Eliza was learning to read and in learning to spell and do maths, I'm really interested in the crossover between some of the things that we put in the category of learning disabilities, certainly learning differences, and learning more about where synesthesia may come into this for different people. I'm sure there are stories there that are untold that are part of what people are experiencing in these things, in dyscalculia, in dyslexia, that we don't yet know much about because, as Eliza said, if it's the way you've always seen it, then you don't necessarily think to articulate it. So that's something I'd really like to know more about for my work and just out of interest.
Your dad has told me that when you were a toddler, you used to judge people fairly quickly. Did that have anything to do with your synesthesia or the colours that you were seeing?
Maybe. I don't really remember, but I think it would have been quite easy for me to judge them that way because it would have been or seemed obvious to me what their personality or traits were, even if that wasn't exactly right. Instead of getting to know them, just looking at their colour would have been an easy way out.
And how much do you think that actually relates to your emotion about that person?
Well, often if I am good friends with someone, but then we have a fight or something and we stop being friends, their colour will change. It always changes very slowly, which is sort of annoying because I sometimes when I'm thinking about it want to know what it's going to be, but it changes over weeks and weeks, and sometimes it'll take a whole term or month to change fully, but I think it never stops changing. It just changes very slightly all the time.
And do numbers and letters, do they change their colour at all?
Not usually, but I had something interesting. The letter E and Eliza, the word Eliza, changed for me quite dramatically. It used to be a sort of dark greenish, which I used to really dislike because every time I looked at an E, I'd see green, which is not one of my favourite colours. But then it started to change, and now I think it's fully changed to a peachy rose gold colour, which are my favourite colours. And Mum and I think it might have been to do with the colour of my room when I was little. It was a sort of dark green because Mum and Dad thought that might help me sleep when I was a baby. But recently we painted it, and now it is pink and blue with dog paws all over them. Glow-in-the-dark dog paws.
Oh, gorgeous.
And so now we think it might be something to do with that it changed and how much I didn't like it.
Eliza and Rachel Watt. I'm Lynn Malcolm. Catch you next time.
You've been listening to an ABC podcast. Discover more great ABC podcasts, live radio, and exclusives on the ABC Listen app.